So, what are some ways that our general posture may affect how baby can descend and rotate through our pelvis? So, the first, if you have a very rib thrusted position, so the ribs are really thrusted upwards, the pelvis is really tipping forward, and we have kind of this external rotation going on. So, we're very open towards the front. It's actually going to close the posterior outlet. So, it's going to decrease the amount of space that baby has to eventually descend and rotate and exit through. So if we're kind of stuck in this position and we don't have the ability to come out, it could inhibit our labor progress. So what can we do? First, we want to think strengthen the hamstrings. So right now in this position, they're fairly long. So I want to think pull the hamstrings down. So shorten them because they're in an elongated state to pull my pelvis back down. So I'm in this position and the hamstring is going to help pull it down so that's a more of a neutral position. So it's from here to like here. The other thing that we want to focus on is the core. So if I'm in this thrusted position, we want to focus on strengthening in the core so that way the ribs in front of the pelvis can come back together. So thrusted position, think engage in the core to bring them closer together. And then the last thing that we want to focus on is being able to shift in our hips. So if we're stuck in this very external position, we want to be able to have this movement happening. So if we look at the pelvis, we want this to be able to happen. So you can see the tailbone of the sacrum is shifting, and that is going to be creating more space at each side of the pelvis to help facilitate rotation, descent, and ultimately birth. So what are some things that we can do? First, we can do hamstring strengthening exercises. So this can be as simple as like a deadlift. So I have a kettlebell here. I'm coming back down, feeling that stretch in my hamstrings. Exhale to extend. So hamstring focused exercises. If you're pregnant, eventually we're going to have to come into a wider stance. So inhale to lower down, exhale to press up. And this is great because we also have our hamstrings, our glutes, and our adductors working together in this more sumo type stance. Really think drive the knees out, boop, to come on up. The other thing that we can work on is that hip shifting. So we can do a similar thing with the deadlift, but in more of a staggered stance. So front leg is forward, I have it holding in the opposite hand, and now as I come down, I'm thinking push this hip back. So I'm thinking push this hip back into the socket as opposed to just turning my body. So I'm thinking shift that hip back as I come down, try to touch the weight to that toe, and then exhale, come back up. Shift that hip back, turn, touch the toe. This is what it looks like from the side. So shift to come down and touch. Obviously, as pregnancy progresses, this may be more challenging, so we may need to widen the stance, particularly of that stagger stance, to really think still shifting and maybe not able to go down as low. So it may be more of like here, but thinking that opposite shoulder is moving towards that front leg, and I think push this back as opposed to shift into that back leg. So shift back here. And now when it comes to core training, this is where people start to get confused. So we don't want to do like crunches and like sit-ups and stuff during pregnancy because the tissue down the center of the abdomen is already in compromised state. So we want to focus more on like rotational activity. So we can think opposite shoulder to that knee. So activating the anterior oblique sling. So everything from the chest, the obliques, crossing that pubic symphysis into the opposite adductor. So these types of movements are going to be great. We can do things like a half kneeling Pallof press or diagonal banded pull down. So I'm going to be moving my hands from here to that opposite knee. So I have that inter-rotation towards the front. So knee and shoulder are both moving together. So this is going to be a great prenatal core exercise. We can do anti-movements. So I'm resisting movement of my core. So like a goblet squat, for example, I'm trying to resist arching and flexing in my spine. I can also do one-sided squats, trying to resist lateral flexion here as I go up and down. So when it comes to core training during pregnancy, literally everything is a core exercise, but we can focus more on those rotational movements. Thinking opposite knee to opposite shoulder are going to be great for pregnancy. Anti-movements, so resisting movement that's happening, and then also hip extension type movements. So the squats, the lunges, all those things are going to be great. So if we are stuck in this very open, proud chest position, we want to focus on strengthening the core, strengthening the hamstrings so we can come back to that neutral position. And then we need to learn how to shift in the hip. So we want to be able to move that pelvis around so that we can create this. We don't want the pelvis to just shift without any sort of movement happening within it. So hamstrings, core, and then also that shifting type movement. So think drive that hip back. So this hip is turning and I'm pressing back into it. A little bit of that front shoulder coming to the knee as opposed to just bending in that back knee. So I think I might be achieving it here, but I really want to think almost like a rotation towards the front.